In this video, we're going to be looking at the effects of the two sex hormones produced in the ovarian phase and how these hormones are used to regulate the different stages of development during the uterine cycle. If we start at the very beginning, going all the way back to the hypothalamus to make sure we have a complete picture, the hypothalamus, of course, produces the primary regulatory hormone GnRH, which in turn stimulates the pituitary gland in order to produce FSH. And because this is follicle-stimulating hormone, FSH is going to stimulate the granulosa outside of the follicle, or outside of the oocyte rather, in order to produce the first of our ovarian sex hormones, estrogen. Now, in addition to the estrogen being used to cause the oocyte to mature, estrogen is also going to migrate to the endometrium and trigger its regrowth, which is what we call the proliferation of the endometrium, which is why we refer to this as the proliferation phase. Now, going back to the pituitary, we know, of course, that FSH is not the only pituitary hormone. The other pituitary hormone is, of course, LH, which stimulates the granulosa to undergo the change to form the structure that we call the corpus luteum, and therefore enter the luteal phase of regulation here. And of course, the job of the corpus luteum is to produce the second of our ovarian sex hormones, progesterone. And the progesterone from the corpus luteum is going to travel to the uterus and trigger the entrance to the secretion phase, so called because one of the functions of the endometrium during the secretion phase is the production of mucus, as well as the increase in blood flow and increase in muscle mass that are required in order for the uterus to become fully mature. Now, in the event where we do not have a successful fertilization of a zygote, now we can see the negative feedback loop, which we discussed in the previous video, in which the high concentration of estrogen from the follicular phase and the high concentration of progesterone from the luteal phase travel back to the hypothalamus in order to inhibit GnRH production. And therefore, if we have no GnRH, we also have no LH production either. And without LH, we have no way of sustaining the corpus luteum, and therefore we get the atrophying of the corpus luteum. And therefore, as a result of no corpus luteum, that means that we no longer have a source for progesterone, and therefore we also have the degradation of the endometrium that results here, and this results in the process of menstruation, the shedding of the unneeded layer of the endometrium, as well as the unfertilized egg, which are shedded out of the vagina during a female period. So if we were to look at this stage here, this is what most women undergo every single month, under the assumption that most women don't have a pregnancy every single month. However, as we looked at in the previous video, if a zygote implants in the walls of the endometrium, this changes the entire regulatory process, because if we have a fetus growing inside of the uterus, we don't want to get rid of the endometrium, as you would be cutting off not only the food supply for the growing fetus, but also the means of getting it out of the uterus. So how exactly does the zygote prevent this? Well, recall in the last video that the zygote produces a hormone called human chorionic gonadotropin, and that means that human chorionic gonadotropin prevents this entire process, because HCG basically has a same, if not similar, structure to LH, to luteinizing hormone, and the job of luteinizing hormone is to keep the corpus luteum functioning, and therefore to keep the corpus luteum producing progesterone. So this is a rather interesting fact, because human chorionic gonadotropin does not actually stop this negative feedback process from happening, because no matter what, we can't prevent the concentration of estrogen and progesterone being high at the same time, because progesterone is needed in order to keep the endometrium functioning. So instead, human chorionic gonadotropin subverts the entire process. So even if this negative feedback process still happens, HCG, because it functions exactly like LH, but because it isn't produced by the pituitary gland, because it's actually produced by the zygote itself, keeps the endometrium functioning, even though the negative feedback cascade has already shut off the normal way that the corpus luteum will function. So because the corpus luteum is functioning because of the influence of human chorionic gonadotropin, that means that the endometrium's muscles that are needed in order to contract and push the fetus out, and also all of the blood vessels that supply nutrients to the growing fetus inside of it, remain healthy all the way up until 9 months later, when the uterus is finally ready to contribute to the birthing of the fetus. In the next video, we're going to take a look at the characteristics that are mediated in the female body by estrogen in order to understand what the consequences are if estrogen and progesterone production is disrupted in any way.